my name's Helen Avery. I'm head of nature programs at the Green Finance Institute. As you may know, we host the Secretariat to the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures, and we run the UK National Consultation Group, which I'll be sharing a little bit more about later. But essentially, our aim with the UK National Consultation Group is to engage as many UK corporates with TNFD as we can, and help them feed back into the framework. There's a really amazing opportunity we have right now before the TNFD launches proper in September for corporates all around the world to share their feedback and really have a say in how the framework is developed. And we want as many UK corporates to know about that opportunity as possible and help them with that, and also help them understand how they're going to start using the framework once it launches. So today we're focusing on the pharmaceuticals, chemicals and biotech industry. We've been going sector by sector, sort of grouping a few sectors together, just because otherwise we'd be doing these information sessions forever, and having these sort of high level lunch and learns where we're just going to talk about the TNFD, go through some of the beta framework releases so far, let you know where we are in the timeline. And we're going to be hearing today from two people as well, which I'm really excited about. Claire Lund, the Global Vice President for Sustainability at GSK, is going to be sharing a bit about their journey and their experience and some of her tips around engaging with TNFD. We'll also be hearing from Andrew Mitchell. He is one of the co-founders of the TNFD, and really the TNFD wouldn't exist were it not for Andrew. It was really his brainchild, and he's also vice chair of the stewardship group for the TNFD. He's going to be sharing a few words on why the TNFD and what it is, and then I'm going to walk you through a few slides to talk, give you a bit more detail and really give you a sort of high level view. And we'll be sharing a lot of links in the chat that you can go away and you can take and go away and look at yourselves. There will be an opportunity to put your questions to Claire as well as Andrew and myself. So please do use the Q&A function for that. And yeah, without further ado then, I'd love to just thank you all for spending your lunchtime with us and hand over to Andrew. I think you're on mute, Andrew.
Yeah, apologies. I thought that was already off mute. So hello and welcome to everybody who's joined. Thank you for finding the time to do so. And thank you, Helen, for those kind introductory words. My job is I'm the vice chair of the Stewardship Council of the TNFD. So, and that's the compilation of all the bodies that help to put it together. And so I'll tell you a bit about how it all started and why we're doing this and how you can be involved in it, and then hand back to Helen, who will take you through the details of the framework. But first, a bit about nature, why we focused on nature. And I think all of you in chemicals, pharma and biotech, you know a lot about this already because of the industries you're in, as compared to people who might be in real estate or construction, who we were talking to yesterday, so slightly further away from these things. But I started out life as a zoologist, actually, hugging trees and orangutans, and I now hug asset managers and bankers most of the time, and trying to help the finance industry to understand about its impact on the environment and also on their portfolios and how it's going to affect them in the future. And there's been an extraordinary learning journey over the last few years as we've moved from understanding climate and that issue towards nature. And after climate, nature is kind of next. When the Paris Agreement occurred in 2015, and you also got the emergence of the Task Force on Climate-related Financial Disclosure at that time, those two events did more to galvanize the finance sector and, to an extent, the corporate sector, which actually was way ahead of the finance sector on these issues, to come to terms with taking this sort of first step into the room and understanding the externalities in our economy that lead us to live in a world of sort of false prices. And what I mean by that is that, we pollute the atmosphere for free. We take things from nature largely for free. And that gives us a false price, a false cost of things. And these things are called externalities by economists, but they're coming home to haunt us now. So the impact on the atmosphere is obvious with climate change, and that affects the prices of fossil fuels, the share prices of fossil fuel companies. and the way in which we all invest in the future. And the same thing is going to happen with nature. So some of you may be using the TCFD, and that is an extremely good framework with which we work with their team very closely. So our idea was, back in around about 2018, thinking that why don't we do the same thing and come up with a similar framework to TCFD, but doing everything beyond carbon. So it's water, forests, landscapes, oceans, all of that. How do you create a reporting framework for that that gives you a risk management framework and a disclosure framework in one? And so that's what we set out to do. We launched it, back in 21. And what's been amazing to me, having been around in this business for a very long time, is the speed of take-up. The speed of interest in TNFD was surprising. And that acronym, TNFD, is literally known around the world. We've got 900 institutions in the TNFD forum. We've got 40 major financial institutions, banks, asset managers, and service providers who act to really put this framework together. We've got loads of working groups working on data metrics and so on, which Helen will tell you more about. And we have a tremendous network of knowledge providers who are putting in the best science to try and come up with this framework, because, this is hard. To come up with a framework for disclosing your impact and dependency on nature is hard, because we don't have a currency like a ton of carbon, like we do in climate. We don't have a simple measurement or target like 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees for nature. And we hope that the Convention on Biological Diversity, which met back in Montreal last year, has, with its global biodiversity framework, has taken a huge step forward. And our framework will help you get on that journey with everything beyond carbon. And when talking about nature, I know you guys will know this, but it's important to recognize this isn't just, it's not just about genetics, and it's not just about butterflies or pollination. It's about infrastructure that keeps our Earth safe. Nature is really big stuff. The small things you can't even see in the ocean, that suck carbon out of the atmosphere. What we would do if microfibers in the ocean from the chemicals industry ruined all that? What would happen if the fertilizer and pesticide industry really did in all the soil? There's a lot of evidence suggesting over time our soils are getting worse and worse. So we need to invent new kinds of ways of doing these things. And one of the incentives for doing that, of course, is reporting and disclosure, which also alters the cost of capital and the way in which money is allocated by large capital institutions like pension funds and banks. So the framework can help in that way in catalyzing and helping us to focus our minds and come up with a reporting methodology. And we've been working hard on that. The 4th iteration of the framework is coming out on the 28th of this month. So for the 50% of you for whom this is new, take a look at it. Go and look at the TNFD website. Look at the framework. Does it work for you? If it doesn't, tell us. We want to get feedback. Join the forum if you want to, because that's a great way to remain informed. And so it's hugely exciting. I've just been so privileged to work with so many bright minds trying to put all this together, and across sectors too, and particularly your sector. I think there's massive opportunity here as well. This isn't just about risk. Reimagining the way in which we can keep soil fertility going is a fantastic opportunity for the chemicals industry. Pharma as well. We all know about medicines and how dependent we are on genetics for that. And the plant world and the animal world is a great store of all that. And then biotech, fascinating to see where that's going. I think the big opportunity is going to be reimagining the global food system in the same way that climate has made us reimagine the global energy system. And I think biotech will be right at the cutting edge of that. If you look at biofermentation and the creating new kinds of foods from new kinds of feedstocks, so we can have vertical farming or producing food in cities instead of having to transport it all the way around the world. These are going to be huge opportunities for the future. So with those remarks, I look forward to our discussion, and I'm going to hand you back to Helen, who will tell you in more detail all about the TNFD. So thank you very much, and back to you, Helen.
Thanks, Andrew. It's wonderful as always to just sort of hear what the inspiration was for TNFD and how much it's been embraced really over the last couple of years already, and certainly got a massive shout out at COP15 back in December in Montreal. So I wonder if we can have the slides up and some questions coming in, which is great, and we will definitely get to those because yes, there are some examples we can already show you of a TNFD disclosure. So yeah, please do keep the questions coming. So as Andrew mentioned, there's a few slides here. We're going to share these with you. Appreciate that if this is your first engagement, this will be a lot of information for you. So I'm going to sort of whiz through them because then we can have Claire on to really sort of bring it to life of how you actually would start to implement this. So so bear with us, but we will be sharing these slides. As Andrew mentioned, a task force was launched in 2021. There are 40 task force members who are working on developing that task force. We have almost actually 1,000 forum members now. The TNFD forum do recommend that you join, and it's very easy to do so. It costs you nothing, you don't have to promise anything. But you just put a request into the TNFD forum. And once you join the forum, you'll be alerted to all the releases. They have news around TNFD, the framework and risk reporting in generally. Great resources page. They also run specific webinars, including sector webinars and data webinars. What we do as the UK National Consultation Group is just we bring together UK peers to come together and learn together. And I'll talk more about how we're going to be doing that for your sectors in a moment as well. So well worth joining that. The minute you do join the forum, we get alerted, and then you join our mailing list for the National Consultation Group. So that link to our site, which tells you more about how to access that forum, is going to be posted in the chat. There's also a data catalyst, which includes over 100 nature-related data providers who are working really hard to understand what are the data gaps that corporates around the world are going to need by sector in order to be able to effectively assess and then disclose their nature-related impacts and disclosures. Obviously, the goal of the TNFD is as Andrew shared, it's not a standards body, works with standards body, it is a framework for disclosure. And ultimately, it will hopefully support a redirection of global financial flows away from activities that harm nature and towards activities that benefit nature, which of course will reduce global economic risk as well as sort of improving the well-being for all, we hope. So next slide, please. Thank you. So I just wanted to walk you through a few milestones. So we've had 3 releases so far. My colleague Amy shared the link to the TNFD website, so you can go and take a look at those beta releases so far. One was in March, one in June last year, and one in November. And as Andrew said, the 4th and final beta release will be next week on the 28th of March. Then there'll be a 60-day period for public consultation. The entire process of these beta releases has been an open process, open to feedback through, there's an online portal, but you can, there are also other ways of feeding back in, and there are pilots happening around the TNFD, and that open process is continuing, but there is a cutoff period. So at the end of by the 1st of June, all feedback really needs to be in for that final beta release framework. So we can't emphasize enough that the next couple of months really provide an opportunity if you haven't engaged in the framework and you want to have a voice in how the framework is being formed. This is your chance, and we will be offering as much support as we can as the National Consultation Group for UK corporates to do that. And in September, the TNFD will be finalised and then released. Obviously, it's appreciated that it will be an iterative process even after it's released, as there's so much we're learning every day and as data comes online and as it's starting to be used. But it will be launched, as I say, at the second half of September. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what are the pillars of TNFD and what are their recommendations? So I think this is really important. There were some really clear calls from market participants, as you can imagine, for a consistent and integrated approach to sustainability reporting. And that, you know, you obviously have the TCFD out there. So could the TNFD try and match that as much as possible so the uptake is quicker, so it's easier for people working hard in their companies to actually follow the guidelines. So the TNFD's draft disclosure recommendations explicitly build on those already recommended in TCFD. So this might be familiar to you. They follow the TCFD's 4 pillars of disclosure: governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. Some have obviously been adapted, particularly metrics and targets. As you can imagine, they've been adapted to reflect that this is a disclosure framework for nature. And there are 4 that are new. Additionally, you can see those there in the dotted lines. I'm not going to go through this just for time's sake, but just to give you a flavour that this is going to be a framework that you should be familiar with already, given all the work you'll have done on TCFD. So next slide, please. There's also, as you can imagine, some sector and also realm specific information. So sector specific information is being provided by sector. You can imagine what the priority sectors are: food and beverage, renewables, alternative energy, infrastructure, extractives, healthcare, consumer goods, transportation, resource transformation. There will be sector guidance for your sectors. Some are being released on the 28th of March, and then some are going to continue to be released up until the launch of the TNFD in September. And that will help you sort of identify what are your specific dependencies and impacts, what are the risks and opportunities. And to support that, the TNFD also has this wonderful periodic table which goes through the different realms, which might be an entirely new word for some of you who are moving from climate into nature, or expanding from climate into nature. But this will help you sort of understand what is it you're looking out, what are you looking for in terms of land, freshwater impact, oceans, if that's relevant to you, atmosphere. So these are all available in the beta releases so far. So definitely recommend that you take a look through them. Next slide, please. So we're often asked, well, where do we start as a company? And often a lot of companies, and this is across sectors, will start with using what's called a tool from Encore. I'm going to try and put that link in the chat for you now. But essentially, the Encore tool is a kind of good first start at understanding what your sector or subsectors impacts and dependencies are. So we've had the support of KPMG for the UK National Consultation Group, and we'll actually be hearing from Louise Heffernan a little later. And they'll be helping prepare some FAQs and support for your sectors. And they very kindly pulled this together from the Encore tool. So just as an example, and we'll leave this obviously with you to explore in more detail. You might know this better than I do, but some of the impacts from biotech, pharmaceuticals and chemicals will be soil, air, water pollution, from fabrication waste and production, could be overexploitation of genetic resources. And the material importance of that is obviously there's potential I can't even say it, microbial resistance, lost revenues due to reputational damage, which I think we've already seen, fines, legal restrictions, expensive restoration projects. This is across all industries, really, this reputational and restoration costs. In terms of dependencies, again, you'll know this better than I, but supplies of ground and surface water, loss of ecosystems for natural product research and programs is also a risk. In terms of opportunities, we heard some put forward by Andrew, but ensuring discharge water is clear of pollutants is an opportunity. Within COP15, some of those targets, it talked about reductions in pesticides and looking at runoff of farms. And some of the risks are the damage to distribution network resulting in perhaps a chemical spill. There's many more risks, opportunities, dependencies and impacts out there, but this is to give you just a bit of a flavour of what the Encore tool can offer you as just a first step. We can have the next slide, please. And Encore tool also goes as far as to sort of share what some of those impacts and dependencies are upstream, midstream and downstream for your sector, color-coded by high risk to low risk. So just an example here, in midstream pharma and biotech manufacture, impacts could be on marine ecosystem use, might be water pollutants, and some of the dependencies could be on surface water, groundwater, and genetic materials. And as you can see here, it's seen as high risk around surface water. So definitely familiarize yourself with that tool if you haven't already. See, you'll have the link in the chat, and there are many other tools. Andrew was sharing yesterday that we have actually about 170 odd tools identified by the TNFD, and we'll be hoping to share those with you as well to make your lives a little easier. So next slide, please. So wanted just to familiarize yourself, familiarize you with the LEAP approach. So in addition to those governance pillars, an approach has been developed to help you get to that disclosure framework, and it's called the LEAP approach, and L stands for locate, and E, evaluate, A, assess, and P, prepare. So locate, as you can imagine with nature, it's really vital that you actually locate what your key interfaces with nature are. So mapping out your business footprint, direct and indirect, identifying which biomes and which ecosystems you interface with, that periodic table I showed you can help you with, defining what are the priority locations based on that interaction with really critical ecosystems, and then identifying the business units or the assets or sectors at those locations. And then from there, you'll be evaluating, okay, what's our dependencies and impacts on nature at those locations? And then assessing, well, now I even understand what my exposure is, actually, what is the material risk and the opportunity of that exposure at those locations to those realms. And then finally, you'll be obviously looking to prepare, and there's a guide on how you can start to prepare here and respond and report on the TNFD recommended disclosures. So you'll hear this phrase a lot, the LEAP approach. So we just wanted to sort of put that on your radar now, and you'll notice that as you're looking at the beta frameworks that they talk about the LEAP approach and have been adding to it and refining it as feedback has been coming in from companies around the world. The final slide, I think, just to sort of give you a sense on how you can engage more. This is, say, we're running these sector-specific information lunch and learn sessions as a way of just starting to, we appreciate a lot of companies early in this journey. Some sectors have moved faster than others. The financial services sector is very well engaged in TNFD, as you could imagine. So we want to run these information sessions to let you know just sort of high level what the TNFD is, where you need to go to get engaged, what the process is at the moment, where the timeline is. And I say the National Consultation Group is really, I call it a mailing list. So if you want to join, we'll send you information for your sector. You'll get a monthly newsletter. We'll let you know about future events. We do plan on, over the 60-day consultation period leading up to the 1st of June, to host much more specific and detailed peer-to-peer learning sessions. And we are working with some trade bodies in your sector to put those together for late April and early May. And the aim is that we'll give you a chance to go away, reflect on the framework, talk about it internally, and at those meetings you can come and sort of share challenges and tips with your peers, but also offer your feedback into the TNFD. And we can collect that at those more sort of detailed roundtables, or you can access the portal on the TNFD website and put your feedback in there, which we welcome as well. So you can join that by emailing, it's in the chat, tnfdncg@gfi.green. The minute you join the TNFD forum, we're alerted and you'll join our mailing list. But I do recommend that you just CC us in just in case you fall through the cracks. So please do that. We are here to support you. And if you have ideas on what you need from us, we're really open to them. I say we have very lucky to have KPMG supporting us over the next couple of months. So anything we can do for you, do let us know. So I think I'll leave it there. We will obviously come back out to you with when there are some specific events for your sector, those more detailed roundtables at the end of May, end of April and May, as I suggested. But now I'd absolutely love to invite Claire to join us to share about her journey with GSK. So we have, and also please do use the Q&A function if you would like to ask Claire some questions. We do sort of frame this up to say it is early for every company. So we're not, would hate to invite people on and have them on the hook for answering very technical questions about TNFD, and that's not why Claire is here. So just to give a bit of disclaimer there. We will try to answer whatever we can. So Claire, thank you so much for giving us your time today. At GSK, very much a part of the TNFD. So wondered if you could just start, and I have a few questions for you, of sharing with us, what was the journey like from climate to nature? Was nature already a key part for you, and what's your sort of interaction with the TNFD?
Thank you, Helen, and thank you for not setting me up with being an expert in all things TNFD. I will reiterate that. And pleased to be here today, and I'm sure many on the call are already well aware of the journey around climate and nature. And for us, certainly, when we set our ambition in 2020, we looked at the climate change ambition to be net zero, and actually realized extremely quickly, as many of you have already done, which is actually you can't reach net zero without also contributing to nature positive. And actually they are two sides of the same coin, fully interrelated. So why would you have just one goal on climate? You would actually need to bring in all of the nature aspects simultaneously as well. And again, growing awareness around the world that actually healthcare systems themselves are around sort of 5% of greenhouse gas emissions. So obviously we need to take collaborative and collective action in that space. And then actually when you look at the impacts to human health from climate change and nature loss, again, the awareness is I think ramping up significantly, from zoonotic transmission, increasing pandemics, the impact of habitat degradation on human health. So all of that coming together, like I said, we set that journey actually at the start, which was to do with the climate and the net contribution towards net nature positive. And actually, and you go through the process and you quite simply realize that actually a lot of the business reasons for looking at this are the resilience of your own supply chain. And that frankly doesn't matter whether it's climate change or access to water or access to materials. They are all part of your access to being able to produce and provide products and medical services, right? So it is a known interconnection now, and I think it's become so much more wide scale in terms of the understanding of that interconnection. But also you can't deliver your climate goals without having the nature fully embedded as part of that. And actually the way I tend to describe it internally is nature is actually the greatest friend in helping to support adaptation and resilience and mitigation of climate change, but it could also be the greatest foe if you don't get it right and bring it fully embedded into the party. So they are connected. And then from a business standpoint, we're looking at where is the resilience, where is the risk, but where are the opportunities? And again, you quickly realize, and this isn't a surprise to I don't think anybody on the call, you can't make your products if you can't get water. You can't make your products if you can't get some of the raw materials. And this isn't just in our sector. This is across the board, right? So that the journey from incorporating nature was actually done right at the front. So this hasn't ever felt like an add-on. And that's probably the stage we're at now. And we'll talk about some other questions in a second, but that's the journey so far.
Yeah, that's probably very helpful, as it says. Some sectors are having to, we're hearing are saying, well, we can't look at nature yet because we're just focused on climate, because they haven't had that sort of interaction from the beginning. So it is positive to hear that it's not quite such a big lift in convincing maybe senior management, to start moving in this direction. So can you just sort of talk us through, how you're looking at, how you're engaging with the framework? And it'd be great to hear what some of the challenges, well, we don't want to scare people away, what some of the challenges you're having are and how you're dealing with them.
Yeah, I mean, I can go into as much detail as needed as well, but again, when we looked at, and we've applied the LEAP process, as you pointed out, we're part of the TNFD working group. I'm very proud to be part of that metrics group. And we've actually applied both at the same time the science-based targets methodologies and the TNFD sort of process together. And actually that's really helped unlock a lot of the sort of interplay between them as well. So partly what we did on nature before a lot of the methodologies were out, and it's actually built into the materiality assessment, is broken it down into, we call them water, biodiversity, and sort of waste and materials. I appreciate there are realms and ecosystems, but to try and keep it simple in the corporate language, we broke it into those. And again, looked at where are the hotspots, where are the commodities being used, where's the location, because I think, as possibly Andrew said, there, climate change is a global phenomenon measured in tons of carbon. Nature is a very local specific issue. You win and lose at a local level, and it is different metrics based on whether it's water quality, water use, a type of commodity or type of material, the impact on land and pollution. So there's lots and lots and lots of different metrics. So part of the framing that we did was break it into sort of those categories, and then actually we've applied the Encore model as well, and the TNFD approach to actually then start breaking it even further into much more location specific understanding. So that Encore piece gave us the first high level framing, and unsurprisingly for our sector, most areas came out as high or medium. So it then takes us down to the next level of granularity, and really looking at, like I said, a supplier location, a physical location. What is that commodity? How far up the chain can we actually get into the data? And to some of your questions around the challenges, it's more about really getting into the location and origin of some of those materials. For again, I'm sure someone on the call will know, it isn't just that we source the raw material. We actually source, I loved the description that one of the team came up with. We actually, a lot of the time, buy the cake. We don't actually know where the flour comes from and the eggs come from, but we're now having to get into where do the flour and the eggs come from, because we actually buy an aggregated sort of chemical or an active pharmaceutical ingredient. So now having to get into the layer of detail, which is, again, great in terms of business understanding, but also resilience and really getting into that level. But actually, it's really helping us to focus and prioritize activity. Because I think one of the things I do want to mention is, and I'm sure I'll say this again at the end, don't wait for the perfect data. There are opportunities to start mitigating your risks and impacts and dependencies on nature now. Everybody knows about them. So, how you be more water efficient, how you can, work through processes to reduce your waste, et cetera, et cetera. So these are activities that we can get on with while we're getting into the perfect level of data and origin as well. And just to give you some insight, some of the tools that we used, which might be helpful. So we did use the Global Forest Watch for land. We used IBAT for species and ecosystems. We used Aqueduct for the water risk assessments, and we used Plastics for downstream plastic impacts. I am not recommending these tools. I'm not on any payroll, but these are just some of the tools that we found useful just to try and get into that level of granularity that is then helping us to sort of prioritize and focus actions.
That's really, really helpful, and we'll capture these and share them back with everybody as well, just to help sort of people know where to start. Were there any data sets that you just can't get to that are being a challenge at the moment? I know you're probably working with the data catalyst as you're in the working group, but I just wondered are there gaps that you've seen?
There are gaps, and we've talked to the data team about where we can actually close some of those out, which is great. But I think a lot of it is really getting into, like I said, breaking apart that cake and really understanding where the sort of materials come from and the origin of some of those, because a lot of the time we'll buy through aggregators, or we'll buy through organizations that are grouped in particular markets or regions, and we're now having to get further and further and further back. And one example I think I used recently was, obviously, as a vaccines company, we source eggs. So you're actually getting into the awful joke of which comes first, the chicken or the egg, and working out how far back do we go and where do we go on this journey. So terrible joke, I'm sorry.
But it's helpful to think through it. Often, I think it's amazing that we haven't already done this already. Companies are sourcing things from all over the world, and we don't always know whether it's actually coming from. So it feels like just good business sense to be doing this. Anyway, although I imagine pretty difficult to do.
I think we do to a certain level, and I think what is great about TNFD and science-based targets is actually getting you right into a level that you probably wouldn't need to go to previously. So really, really uncovering sort of, again, risks, but also potentially opportunities for, well, okay, can we change that material? Do we have to source it from there? Can we change? Do we have to use that in the first place? So it is bringing in some of that granularity where probably I'd say most organizations, particularly in this sector, have already had that first deep dive into that level, because we have to make sure that we've got business resilience. We're making medicines. So I think that knowledge is there. It's just going really into sort of the next level, which is helpful as well.
Great. We've got a couple of questions here, so maybe I'll take one of those. And I say, feel free to punt on this, Claire, if you're not able to answer it, because it's fairly technical. But it says, it's from Martin Turner on the R&D side of things. I think maybe asking the question: are you assessing service providers, including clinical research organisations, universities, and hospitals?
I think the answer to that is we will be, but as we are still going through layers and layers, and I'm sure many on the call will appreciate 30,000 suppliers, multiple million items of commodity codes and supplier locations. So yes, we are working through a lot of that, and the first materiality assessment has been done. We're now, like I said, it's almost like turning the handle again on the next level. All of the R&D aspects will be included in that from the sort of as we're going through into the levels, and it will be getting further and further down into that hotspotting as well.
Brilliant, thank you. There's a question from Mark Johnston, and actually it's worth flagging up here that Mark, as well as being with BP, I hope you don't mind me saying that, Mark, is with the UK Business Biodiversity Forum, that's bringing corporates together, and they also have peer-to-peer learning sessions around TNFD. So I don't know if we could put the link in the chat, but a group well worth joining as well for all things sort of nature, if you're a UK business. But you mentioned about how you didn't quite use the realms that were laid out in the TNFD, and he has a question that may even be to me about the use of the realms of TNFD within the LEAP framework and why they're needed, because he says that they are high level, and he's also struggling to understand the value of reporting against them. And it's not a question I can answer, sadly, Mark, but we will take it back to the TNFD team in terms of how they're seeing other companies use those realms, report on them, and whether they're having the same getting the same feedback as you, and we can certainly pass that on. But Claire, I don't know if you've got a comment on the realms. I mean, this is a very candid conversation. We're taking feedback while it's here, so we're open to if it's
I
not
think
quite perfect.
thanks, Mark, for that. I think the candid response would be, from a scientific and a technical level, we've got to get into that level of understanding, which we have done. So when we've done the materiality and looked at sort of the realms, the biomes and the ecosystems, we've gone into that scientific granularity. However, when you're then trying to talk to the finance director or the chief financial controller for a company, if you start talking about realms and biomes, you genuinely do lose the understanding. So it is actually about, yes, you've got to do right the correct scientific understanding and integrity, great, and the right teams are on that, but actually you've got to translate that back into a bit more of a corporate lens, which people can understand from a look, water resilience, we can't get water, we've got the wrong quality, or we've got a water pollution issue, and it's in this location, and these are the challenges, and this is the risk, and this is the opportunity. That's understandable. If I had to throw in a whole load of different other terminologies that are very scientific and technical, you sort of lose that buy-in. So I think there is a role for translation. I am not undermining the scientific integrity is there. Absolutely, that's critical. But I do think there is a translation piece, because part of what we're trying to do here, and I think everybody's trying to do, is you don't just want one or two companies providing disclosures and reporting against their impacts and dependencies. We want as many companies to be aware and reporting. And we called for that mandatory disclosure for impacts at COP15, because actually if we have got everybody getting to that level of awareness, then we have got an opportunity to reverse nature loss, which is the ultimate goal, right? So there is a translation piece. I don't know the answer, Helen, unfortunately, but from our perspective, we did have to provide that translation internally as well.
I think that's really helpful to hear, and this is why this 60-day consultation period, I think, is so crucial, because that kind of feedback, it will be so helpful when TNFD launches, even if they can just give examples of how people have translated what's quite ecological speak into more of some language that's more familiar to people within organizations. So thank you, Claire, and thanks, Mark, for that question. Just so picking up on this mandatory, there's a question here: do you think TNFD will become law like TCFD? I'm not going to ask you to answer that, Claire, but just to let you know, that I think there is a push to have it mandated. It's not launched yet, so let's give it a chance to launch the TNFD in September before decisions are made. I think some countries have already suggested that they're going to, and obviously in the COP15 targets, it was that word mandatory did not go in, but not surprising given it was 196 countries, and some of those countries happen to be at war right now. So mandating TNFD might not be the top of their agenda for their companies, but it certainly was, I can't remember the exact wording, but it was something like encouraging companies to disclose and report. So I would imagine, yes, will be down the line, but we don't know yet, is the answer to that one. I don't know if is it possible to publish an example of TNFD disclosure? Yeah, we can share some with you, expecting actually quite a lot of disclosures over the next few months. I believe that was the last I heard from the TNFD. There was an example recently of an Asian firm. I can't remember. They might have been from Japan, I'm not sure, but we can put that in the docs back to you. So if you've signed up for this webinar, you'll receive an information pack as well. And Louise can share a bit more about that in a moment. Another one from Mark. I don't know, Claire, you can see this one, but it says target 15 of the Global Biodiversity Framework includes requests for businesses to report on their compliance with DSI regulations. With your experience in biotech, would you see the TNFD framework as a way of reporting on DSI?
I don't know the answer to that yet, Mark, and the reason behind all of that, and you'll know the answer better than I do, is because the structure of the DSI arrangements and even the definitions of detail hasn't actually been formalized yet. I think there is a way to go, and we're committed to working with, finding a workable solution on that. Could the TNFD actually then take that into its structure? Yes, I suppose is the answer, and I assume, Helen, as part of the TNF evolution, there will be updates as targets such as in the CBD and other details get worked through. They're actually then absorbing the latest regulation and requirements, right? So I think ultimately it could. I'm not designing the TNFD, but I would see no reason why it wouldn't adopt best practices and structures that come through.
Great. And also, I know that just in the back end, I can see Louise has posted the wording around target 15. So I wonder, Amy, if we could just cut and paste that and share it with everyone on the chat so they can see it. So they can just see the wording around that while mandatory. Thank you very much. That's helpful. And of course, while you're reading through the beta frameworks, it's well worth going through those targets again from GBF just to see. Just to sort of refresh yourselves with those if you haven't already. That I think that's another important document. And Mark says, thank you, Claire. Sorry, it was a tricky question. He doesn't know either. And then there's a question here from Brendan. Are there any measures such as third-party verification to ensure the integrity of disclosures? I'm going to take that one away and come back to you, Brendan, and we'll put it on in the information doc. But I don't know if there's anyone here who might want to comment on that. I think probably that's one that we'll take away. So Claire, just as we're sort of starting to wrap up here, what are your tips, I suppose, of how, I mean, you shared a lot with us, but what are your kind of tips of how you might start to engage? Certainly if you're having to sort of talk to senior management about it as well, and there might be some pushback. What are your tips?
Oh, in a nutshell, I think, I mean, look, a lot of organizations know where their risks and dependencies lie. It is probably just framing it into that these are actually probably nature related risks and dependencies. You may have already realized, most of us have, that water is a critical life force, and we can't make products without it. And certainly when you look at the health connection, water and health go absolutely hand in hand. So I think it's actually just bringing that framing back up into what does it mean for the organization, and what are the high level, and this is where we started, what are the high level risks and dependencies that we may have been understanding but hadn't connected it to, actually if nature loss happens, which nobody wants, these will get amplified and a lot worse. So that's that sort of first level of understanding and awareness. I think then doing that sort of assessment to understand the hotspots and some of that materiality, because you could focus, and this has been the challenge, I think, is you could go down several different streams of investigation, and actually part of it is how do you prioritize where you look for action. And then the third one is don't wait. I think it's absolutely critical, important that, again, the perfect data will come at some point, hopefully in the future, but actually working on water reduction, water efficiency, materials reduction, materials efficiency, and these have been programs that have embedded within organizations for many years anyway. But it's then taking that lens beyond your own operating footprint and into, or where are those from upstream, or where is the location downstream as well.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. So grateful. We're just, our aim is to get the TNFD on as many radars as possible across the UK, and really support everyone in engaging with it, offering feedback, and starting to disclose when the framework is launched. I'm going to pass over to Louise Heffernan, who's Associate Director at KPMG. As I mentioned, they've been supporting us on the UK National Consultation Group. So just going to give a bit of a wrap up and talk about next steps for you all on this call. So over to you, Louise.
Thanks very much, Helen, and thanks, Claire. That was a really interesting discussion. Lovely to see everyone here on the call. So in terms of next steps, we'll be collating a lot of the really interesting questions actually that have come up in the Q&A, and more that we've received, and those that we think will be helpful for you, into a 1 or 2 pager on kind of key information that you heard today, why this is relevant for your sector, and key questions that might kind of help you kickstart that journey. And amongst those, in addition to the questions, there's kind of 4 or 5 themes that I've seen come up through the conversation that Helen and Claire have had today, and within the questions, that I think are really important to kind of take away and think about as you're tucking into your sandwich over this lunchtime. So first of all, and I always feel so happy when this comes up in conversations, because a lot of us have been banging on about it for years, but that connection between climate and nature is just now so clear. I think it's becoming common knowledge that net zero targets just aren't possible unless we start to integrate this. And I think a lot of organizations are feeling really grateful that there are frameworks being developed like the TNFD that help them do that integration, because it's all well and good hearing, well, your climate target's not going to happen if you think about nature. And it's like, oh my goodness, how? Well, we're finally now in the position that we can start kind of unpicking some of that and solving both challenges at the same time, which breeds a lot of efficiency. The second, which I think is really interesting and is probably appropriate for all sectors, but I've particularly kind of been convinced of it through the conversation here today, is resilience, and the importance of looking at these issues for your company's resilience, which fits directly into your business strategy, and the complementarities that this agenda has with your business goals and maintaining that business and growth has really kind of come out of the conversation. What you need to do as a business, particularly within this sector, absolutely requires you to consider this, and also the opportunities that you might be missing to increase that resilience or grow your kind of organization further. The reputational benefits, the efficiency benefits all kind of tie in very well here, and I thought that was a really interesting point that Claire raised. Thirdly is the real location orientated aspect of this challenge, and as we've heard, this is a slight nuance from the way that we've looked at climate. We're always thinking about geography when we're thinking about climate, but for this particular challenge you really get to dive into that location specific aspect, and that could present challenges, but also as Claire outlined, a whole kind of suite of benefits as well for getting that detailed information about where your eggs and flour are coming from, and kind of what further information that will give you. I think globally we are all getting to a perspective where we just want as much information as possible. We want to know where things have come from. We want to know how we can use data to increase our performance. And this particular issue is no different to that. I think the location orientated kind of aspect of doing these risk assessments really helps you straight away give targeted actions and targeted mitigation levers. And that's what we've heard by going into the detail and figuring out exactly where that impact is, exactly where that dependency is. Your response can be a little bit more targeted, which is a real benefit. And we saw some questions in the Q&A speaking to this as well about the realms and why that's important and where those differences lie, and taking that lens beyond your own footprint. The fourth, which I thought was really interesting actually, and haven't heard as much, but one for us to really dig into, is the need for translation. So once you've done this assessment internally, what does that mean? How do you use it? How do you translate that into a conversation you have with your supply chains, with your clients, or with your investors, for example? And what are the next steps for reporting and engaging with supply chains? And who can help you with that? Kind of what does that need to look like? How do you turn those results into something you can do something about? And I think there's a lot of thought being put around that. And the final one, which again, I'm really, really glad to hear, and these webinars are brilliant for exposing this, is we can start now. And to steal the words of David Craig, who says this every single time I hear him talk about TNFD, is everyone says there's no data. Well, it's absolute rubbish. Listen, we can do some of these assessments now. As Claire said, a lot of your organizations have already been thinking about these aspects, but may not have been looking at it through a frame of nature. And also there are tools. Claire listed just 4 there that allowed her to give a really broad range of where those risks may be. There are tools. It doesn't have to be perfect. There is data. It doesn't have to be perfect. But what it does is start to focus minds within your organization about what risks you might be exposed to, and kind of allow you to get ahead of doing something about that. It won't be wrong. It will be a starting point in the journey. And I think that's a really nice thing for us to end on and take away. So thanks very much,
Thanks,
everyone.
Louise. And just on this point, if you're engaged in the framework now, what you see as data gaps, you can take back to the TNFD. There's this data catalyst who's working on filling those gaps. But there is so much data out there. I do know that over COP15, TNFD ran many, many data sessions for different sectors to let you know what the data is that other companies are using. If you join the TNFD forum, just another plug for that, you have access to all those past recordings, and there is so much information already out there of what companies are doing and what the data is that they're using. So really recommend joining that, having a look through the website, which I know is getting a revamp as well over the next few months, to make it a little more user-friendly, but I find it quite user-friendly anyway. But all that information is on there. We have been keeping recordings of these sessions as well if you wanted to look at other sectors. Mark actually joined it, who we heard from on the Q&A, joined us in the Energies and Extractives Lunch and Learn a couple of weeks ago, and that recording is up on the Green Finance Institute website. The link is in the chat. So with that, 3 minutes back to have a cup of tea. Just to say a big thank you again to you, Claire, for joining us today and sharing and inspiring, hopefully, your peers in the sector to start on this journey. Andrew, a big thank you to you as always for coming and rallying the troops, and also for establishing the TNFD. And thanks, Louise. And thank you to all for joining us on your lunch hour. You have our email should you need anything, but otherwise you'll be hearing from us shortly. Thank you.